I kind of have a general rule about kind of the US and kind of global affairs, and that is if the US is accusing a nation of doing something wrong, then it's very important to look at the United States track record on this or look what they're currently doing. Because the United States accuses nations of doing all kinds of wrongdoing, and then usually later, a story will break, and we'll find out that it was actually the United States what was doing the thing that they were accusing another nation of doing. And today's story is exactly that. There was a report that came out recently in Reuters about the United States actively running anti-China campaigns during the pandemic. So this is the story.
A new investigation by Reuters has revealed the U.S. military ran a secret anti-vaccination campaign at the height of the pandemic in the Philippines and other nations in an effort to sow doubt about COVID vaccines made by China. The clandestine Pentagon campaign began in 2020 under Donald Trump and continued into mid-2021 after President Biden took office. The Pentagon set up numerous fake social media accounts on multiple platforms to target audiences in the Philippines, Central Asia, and the Middle East. The campaign also aimed to discredit masks and test kits made in China. According to Reuters, the secret operation was launched to counter what it perceived as China's growing influence in the Philippines and other countries. One senior military officer involved in the campaign told Reuters, "We weren't looking at this from a public health perspective. We were looking at how we could drag China through the mud," they said.
So as you can see from that little news clip, the story is basically during the height of the pandemic, the Chinese government was exporting Sinovac vaccines to countries that were on good terms with China or countries that were requesting it. They were doing this in Africa, they were doing this in Asia, and specifically in the Philippines. So the story is, for about 10 months, the only vaccine that was available was the Chinese one, the Sinovac. And they were exporting it to the Philippines. This made the United States essentially look bad because they didn't have a solution for this global crisis. And China was gaining some, I guess, political points or some, in the eyes of the United States, China was kind of winning this information war that they were able to create a vaccine quickly and they were able to get it to other countries. And people were kind of gravitating towards China and saying, well, we want a solution and China has something. And this was making the United States look bad. So they embarked on this campaign to basically say that the Chinese vaccination was ineffective, it was bad, it wasn't going to help anyone, and that it actually could be harmful. And I remember in the height of all of this, there was a slogan going around, and I had this all over my channel, and I saw it on other channels. Everybody was kind of chanting this phrase, China lied and people died. This was kind of like, I guess one of the CIA operations was trying to make this content go viral and trying to make China look bad because, you know, it was first reported that the virus, you know, was first reported in Wuhan. And so they were saying, look, it came from China. China's responsible for this. China lied about the numbers, and therefore China lied and people died. While in reality, the United States was actively spreading misinformation and lying about the vaccination in order to win political points. And because of that, many people in the Philippines, this is what the report was kind of focusing on the Philippines, many people in the Philippines didn't take the Chinese vaccination, and they also were skeptical of any other vaccinations that came along, whether it was the Moderna or some of the other ones, Pfizer or whatever one that came afterwards. And this is kind of one of those things where you're like, you're playing with people's lives. Maybe some of those people would have sought medical treatment sooner. That could have helped them. Maybe they would have got vaccinated. That possibly could have helped them. That's still debatable. But again, you're creating an environment for political points because you're afraid that a country is gravitating towards the one that is attempting to help. And I think it's really interesting because not very many news outlets, at least Western news outlets, have actually picked up on this. It seems to be kind of brushed aside and acting like it's not a big deal. But this report went in and found that there was multi-million-dollar contracts being signed for Global Dynamics, which was basically a subcontractor of the CIA, and they were actively using Twitter and Facebook and any other social media platforms to discredit China, to say that China was the one that was responsible for basically everything bad going on at that point, and also to say that China's vaccine was ineffective. This, in a way, gives credence to everything that China has been saying for years and years and years. And what they've been saying is, we don't want Facebook in China. We don't want Twitter in China. We don't want unregulated social media in China because this is the type of campaigns that the United States will run. And not just the United States, other nations will run these types of campaigns. And if you're spreading this misinformation, it's very likely that people are going to believe it. Because you can't really blame the consumers of this type of content, because most of them are mindlessly scrolling and they'll read some headlines and they won't go much deeper than that. I see it all the time in the comments here. People will be like, oh, well, what about Xinjiang? Or what about this? Or what about that? And you're like, well, did you actually go and read all the reports? Because if you actually went and read all the reports and actually did some digging and actually did some research, you'd realize that a lot of what's being said is being portrayed in a very biased way. So there may be some truth to the story, but it's being warped and misrepresented to the point that it's a lie. And very much so with this story, where it's been, investigated, and this person who wrote the article is saying, yes, they absolutely spent millions of dollars running these fake accounts and running ads and basically just putting out fake news about what was going on in China. And if they were doing it in 2020 during the pandemic, do you think they've stopped? Of course not. I see so many channels that their content, whether it's on Twitter or on Facebook or on YouTube, the content is not good. But yet you'll see these videos with 2, 3, 4, 5, even 20 million views, and you watch it and you're like, this isn't a very good video. There's no facts. Yeah, even the editing's not very good, so there's no substance to the content, but the headline says something like, China did something. So an example of a story that's going viral a couple of days ago was that there was some videos coming out of the Philippines, and basically all the headlines said, Chinese attack Philippine Navy vessels, or something like that. Different headlines basically saying that China is attacking the Philippines, and, it's this whole story. And then you watch the video and you're like, doesn't look that serious to me. Nobody was killed. Both parties are at fault because both parties are in contested waters. Both parties claim that these islands in the waters around the islands belong to them. So China claims the islands and the Philippines claims the islands. And so the Philippines were trying to resupply the island, and China stepped in and said no. Nobody died. Nobody got seriously injured, like life-threatening. But all the media is basically saying, look how awful China is. Look how bad China is. China's the worst country in the world. And those posts are getting boosted to millions and millions of people around the world, again, demonizing and villainizing China, when they're saying this is kind of the normal thing that would happen if there's some kind of contested territory. You wouldn't just leave it, you would defend it, right? Because you're defending what you consider your territory, and the other party, in this case, the Philippines, is defending what they consider their territory. So this is just one more example of showing how the United States uses the media, and specifically social media, to push narratives that are damaging not just for third parties. So in this case, the United States is trying to make China look bad. So that's kind of the two parties that are conflicting. But they're using the Philippines and the Philippine people to, in a way, persuade or change public opinion about China. And it has real consequences. In this case, I'm sure there were many people who could have gotten treatment and possibly had a better outcome for the whole situation had they actually went and got medical treatment. But because of this misinformation and because of this campaign, many of those people either ended up having a much more serious sickness and illness, or possibly even died. It's hard to track the exact numbers, but these are the campaigns that are being run all the time. This psyops and these psychological and these social media misinformation campaigns are being run constantly. You can see it if you're on any type of Western social media. And it's just like anytime the United States accuses a nation of doing something, it's very important to see what the United States is doing on it. And I'm not saying that China's vaccine was effective. And I'm not saying that China doesn't run these types of campaigns. You can see it on Chinese social media here all the time, where they're blasting the United States for doing X, Y, and Z. But what I don't like to see, and what I guess what I hate to see, is that average everyday people are buying into these narratives without ever looking farther. And it actually, I think, hurts individuals more than it hurts China or hurts, the United States. And at an individual level, that's where you can have these kind of interpersonal conflicts. This is where, you see people getting attacked in the United States during this time period because there was so much information against China that people that weren't even of Chinese descent, they were just Asians in the United States, Koreans and Filipinos and, Japanese and anybody else that was just living their life in the United States, but they are of Asian, descent, they were getting attacked. And so these campaigns can really affect people, whether it's from a health standpoint or whether from it's like a violence or attack standpoint, or just negative opinions where people could possibly be friends, but because they get this negative information constantly being artificially created and pushed to them, they start to believe it. And, I don't know where you go with that, but I guess my hope, my wish, my desire is that more and more people will actually take the time to read beyond the headlines and try to find out what is actually going on before they come to any type of final conclusion. And again, with this story, it probably won't go very far and life goes on. But it's not the only time that we've seen this misinformation against China or against other nations that disagree with the United States. And it goes in every direction. Every country is running these. This is why it's become such a mess online, is because Russia runs these campaigns. Ukraine runs these campaigns. I mean, I've been reached out to make videos about how the war effort is going in Ukraine. And they said they would send me videos, and all I had to do was basically say the war is winning because I'm an influencer. And I'm like, have you watched my content? But I get emails like that all the time. Well, not all the time, but I've gotten a couple of those emails where they were saying, will you basically make a propaganda video on behalf of Ukraine? And I'm like, no, I won't. But there's a lot of people who will take that money. You can see it on Twitter. You can see it here on YouTube. There's lots of people that will take that money and then they'll run that narrative saying that the war in Ukraine is the best thing that's ever happened, essentially. That the Ukrainian army is pushing into Moscow any day now, and the war is glorious, and it's, whatever else they're saying, when the reality doesn't seem to support that narrative. I mean, they've been doing this pretty much in every conflict since Vietnam, since Korea. I mean, literally since World War I and II. You could have newspaper articles saying we're winning the war. I mean, the whole book, All Quiet on the Western Front, was about how Germany was lying to its people, saying that the Western Front, they were winning, but in reality, they were getting beaten. So you can see how damaging misinformation is to the average consumer, because the average media consumer doesn't have the time, the energy, or even the ability to track down these sources and find out what is true and what is false. So we end up falling into narratives that we agree with. If we think the United States is great, then we'll believe that type of information. If we think China's great, we'll believe that kind of information sometimes. And that doesn't really reflect the reality. If we think the war in Ukraine and Ukraine is in the right, then we'll believe that Ukraine is winning. If we think that Russia's in the right, then our bias, our personal bias, and our own narratives will take over and we support Russia more. Same in Gaza, Palestine, all these places where this misinformation is creating a toxic environment online. And this is why many countries don't want Western social media. They don't want Facebook. They don't want Twitter. They don't want, YouTube even. And this is why the United States doesn't want TikTok, because they say, well, if we run these types of campaigns on our social media, what would stop China from running those same types of campaigns on their social media and targeting our people? So it's really interesting. I hope that things will change, but I doubt it. So I guess for you, when you see the opportunity to share an article or to educate somebody in a respectful way, please do, because I don't think that it helps when people are getting attacked on the streets, because this was literally what was happening during that period in 2020, 2021. There was a lot of attacks on, again, people of Asian descent, regardless of if they were Chinese. And, whatever the next conflict's going to be, whatever the next flashpoint will be, these same things will happen. And bashing any nation just to gain a few political points or to get reelected, because now we're going into an election season in the United States, that seems so wrong to me. I guess that's what it really comes down to. It just seems wrong. And if you can shed light on a story that is fake and you can actually prove it with sources, try to. Because the only way that we get out of this is if more and more people are willing to do the hard things, to do the work, to look beyond their own biases and say, actually, is this a true story, or is it being run by, an agency, whether it's Mossad or the CIA or China or Russia or any of the agencies that work for any number of countries, who's responsible? And you also just have to be aware of the people that aren't working for anyone. They're just doing what makes them the most money. So a lot of people in that space too, where they'll just put out misinformation because it gets clicks and they make money. So you have to be really aware and try and help each other when you see misinformation. Try to report it. Try to shed some light on it, because I don't see it stopping. Anyways, I've rambled for long enough. What do you think about this story? Particularly, what do you think about social media? Has it helped or harmed society? Has this always been going on? Like I was mentioning back in World War I in the newspapers, World War II, and even novels and books about propaganda that's been studied for years. Is it just something we live with and it's, unfortunate? Or is there any way that we could actually hold these social media companies accountable for their actions, or even going farther up the line, hold agencies that are creating this type of content accountable? What are your thoughts? Leave a comment below, and thank you to the members who are still members. It's, again, always like to say thank you. And I'll see you in the next video.